Hello, I'm David M. I want you to join me. I want you to join me amongst the ranks of the brave. I want you to join the people who look adversity in the eye and refuse to blink. I want you to join those who sacrifice so much for such a worthy cause. That's right. The Club Penguin Army wants you. Yes, this is a real thing, and it has been around for about 19 years now. My first exposure to them was when I was recruited to join the Rebel Penguin Federation on a private server in 2019. Since then, I've sporadically engaged with the community, taking part in a couple different battles within Club Penguin every once in a while. But from that point onwards, the CP Army community has remained a strange internet oddity which has continued to fascinate me. I had so many questions when I first discovered them, as I'm sure you do as well. How did this start? How does it work? And why has it lasted so long? Today, I'm going to explore all of this and more. We'll learn about the community's humble beginnings, how rules were standardized, and we'll even talk about some of the strangest conflicts which arose between its many community members. Join me, won't you? To understand the Club Penguin Army community, it's best to discuss Club Penguin itself and its history. So with that in mind, let us begin from the very beginning. In 2003, programmers Lance Priebe, Dave Crisco, and Lance Merrifield approached their bosses at Rocket Snails Games, the developer they worked for, with a pitch for a new virtual world intended to be a safe digital space for kids where they could socialize free of advertising. Considering what this site ended up becoming later after Disney bought it, I find that kind of ironic. They were given the green light and were allowed to spin off the project into a new company called New Horizon Interactive. They quickly began to develop this virtual world, selecting penguins to be the main avatar, as they were used in several previous projects developed by Priebe. 1 year development later, Club Penguin was released to the public. Club Penguin's gameplay was, by modern standards, somewhat simplistic. It was set on an Arctic island populated by the titular bird, the penguins, and featured a variety of locations like the town, the plaza, and the ski village, where players could hang out and chat with one another. Scattered throughout the island as well were shops where kids who paid for a membership could go in to buy clothes for their penguin with coins. In order to get coins, you had to play mini-games, also scattered throughout the island. Minigames ranged from things like sled racing, which could be joined from the ski village I mentioned earlier to the west, to making pizzas in the pizza parlor to the east. In addition, the game also allowed players to decorate their penguin's home, in this their igloos, with furniture which could also be bought with coins. To be honest, looking back at the earliest versions of Club Penguin is wild because it's so stripped back compared to what it grew into as its early years progressed. Iconic locations like the forest and the pizza parlor weren't a part of the game at first, though that did change as the years went on. Despite the rather simplistic game design, the many locations across the island offered plenty of options for roleplay. Honestly, it may be hard for younger people to wrap their head around, but there was something really pleasing about playing on Club Penguin despite how bare bones it seems to us now. It was fun to be able to pretend to do things that you couldn't do in real life, like pretend to be a barista at a coffee shop, or to go and order pizza at a fancy pizza parlor, or to go dancing in the nightclub. As I said, the game quickly grew in popularity, and that popularity was maintained by the inclusion of parties, events which broke up the normal style of gameplay on the island. Essentially, every few months, the island would have a party. These parties would lead to rooms and locations being completely redecorated, and new activities and themed clothes being introduced for a short period. Sometimes these would be themed around a real-world holiday like Halloween, but sometimes they'd be for something entirely unique, like the music jam parties that would be hosted every summer. The entire island would be decorated in music-themed decorations, and there would be new activities to do related to music as well. These parties are important, soldier, so keep them in mind, because they would indirectly lead to the creation of the Club Penguin Armies, when in 2006, a year after Club Penguin launched, they had the sports party. This party, to me at least, really demonstrates how bare bones these events were at the start of the game compared to what they were like later. Essentially, the theme for this party was that you were supposed to pick a team, red or blue, and rep them with themed t-shirts and the like. Red for the red team, and blue for the, well, you get the idea. This kind of choose your team idea was really compelling to a lot of players. I mean, these were kids after all, and what kid doesn't love being part of like a team or a secret club or whatever? I bet plenty of people watching this were part of or wanted to be part of like a secret club of some kind that some other kids they knew put together at some point in their childhood, even if the club ended up not lasting that long. I remember we had a friend in the neighborhood who had like a honeysuckle tree in the backyard, and we built like a fort, and we were gonna have something called the Honeysuckle Club in the backyard of his house. And then it just kind of never happened again after that first day where we built the fort. Oh well. And so, with this in mind, players went out to rep their selected teams and to face off against their opposing team. Snowball fights were had all around the island, snowball throwing being an interaction you could also do in-game, which allowed you to throw them at other players. The fights that inevitably broke out between the red and blue teams are considered by some to be the proto-version of the Club Penguin armies we see today. And this whole event is known colloquially in the community as World War I. The party eventually ended, but the idea that people could join little groups who existed in-game continued to really fascinate a lot of players. And this was indirectly encouraged by the introduction of the Teams and Clubs subcategory on the game's Miniclip forum. People liked being in little groups on Club Penguin, and so they continued to form even after the sports party ended. Miniclip was, if you're unaware, and I can't believe that I have to explain this, an old website where young kids could go to play Flash games, but it also hosted access to Club Penguin. In particular, it hosted access to the game's server, which was named Mammoth. The continued popularity of the sports party, combined with the invention of the Teams and Clubs subforum, led to the creation of what are called now clans on the Club Penguin servers. Clans were mini armies, essentially, with comparatively few members to what armies are like today. They would all dress up in the same outfits and would, as far as I can tell, just go around and would then get into random fights with other clans over ownership over certain servers or areas on the island. I don't know why these are called clans. I'm not sure if that was what they were called at the time, or if this is what they've been retroactively called, but I can only assume that they were called this because of the popularity of things like warrior cats. Of note in particular was the founder of one particular clan who went by the username Oglethorpe, or Oglethorpe. I'm not sure how to say this. He is considered to be the de facto founder of Club Penguin Armies as a whole. He'd been a member of the blue team during the sports party, but gained popularity as a leader on Club Penguin in the forums after forming his own clan, one named, funnily enough, the Army of Club Penguin, or ACP, as I shall be referring to them going forward. These early skirmishes between clans were known as World War II, much in the same way the sports party is referred to as World War I by people. This period is also where we begin to see, on occasion, bits and pieces of footage of battles between clans in the archive. The oldest piece of footage of a Club Penguin army battle is found from this time and is set in someone's igloo. The frame rate for this video is really rough, which is why it's moving so slowly, but this gives us an idea of what battles were like at the start of this community's founding. There was a big focus on roleplay and throwing snowballs at one another. Seeing as how everyone involved in this was a little kid, tensions between clans often ran at a fever pitch, and the next major conflict between them would lead to the clans developing into much bigger organizations with many more members, transforming them from clans into proper armies, like we see today. This conflict would be called, you guessed it, World War III. World War III began due to the rise of a new clan, the Underground Mafias, who were created by a player named Pink Mafia, which began to grow in popularity. Oglethorpe perceived this as something of a threat to the popularity of the ACP, and this dislike of them escalated to outright disgust and hate when Underground Mafia began to attack the ACP without provocation. This was escalated even further when Oglethorpe checked Pink Mafia's website and discovered that he was a hacker who was outright cheating to get rare items in the game. Incensed, Oglethorpe decided to declare outright war with the Underground Mafias. To quote from Ogle's account of the period, "As usual, I did not hesitate to take action. Immediately, I commented on Pink's site, stating that he must stop advertising hacks and to stop attacking Mammoth. Otherwise, the ACP would declare war. One of his top soldiers, Michael 427, responded with the words, "Bring it on." And so, war was fought. Some of you may be wondering how winners in these wars were decided, seeing that people couldn't really die in the game. And I had that question too when I first started working on this. Even looking at the footage from that igloo battle, it seems to just be a lot of running around and people throwing snowballs and saying that their army is the best, or saying that they're launching catapults at the opposing team, that kind of thing. It doesn't seem like there's any real way to determine who'd actually win. To quote Oglethorpe once again, in answer to this question, "You couldn't win until it looked like you won. The victory of a battle was decided by what the average observer would see. Essentially, once one side seemed to be overwhelming the other, either by number of troops or how many snowballs they were throwing or whatever else, the other side would be unofficially declared the loser and would retreat, and the side that overwhelmed them would be declared the winner." It kind of worked on basically an honor system, for better and for worse by the sound of it. But this is important because that meant that in order to take on Mafia, the ACP would need to outnumber them. And despite attempts to increase recruitment numbers, the ACP struggled against the Pink Mafias, and Oglethorpe eventually surrendered during an apocalyptic battle in the dojo on Mammoth, the server which ACP considered their home and main territory. By the time the battle started, it took me nearly 10 minutes to even get in the dojo. It was lagging like crazy, and the room was absolutely full. By the time I got in, I saw nothing but black and red. The UMA, Underground Mafias, had come early and outnumbered us 6-1. It took several minutes of chaos for me to rally a group of about 12 ACP soldiers to stage a counter-offensive, but it was not working. Most of the ACP soldiers couldn't even get in the room, and those that did manage to get in could not see any of my commands due to the constant chant of UMA, UMA, UMA. Within 20 minutes of the most brutal massacre the ACP had ever been on the wrong side of, I decided that it was not worth it. No one was leaving the room, and my soldiers couldn't get in. Even if they could, this battle was far from reversible. I had to surrender. Disillusioned, he and the ACP retreated to another server named Breeze to regroup and plan. The ACP's comeback began quickly, though. They did not stay beaten for long. For one thing, a bunch of players on the site ended up reporting Pink Mafia en masse for hacking, getting him banned. A lateral move which completely wrecked the Underground Mafia's ability to organize because their leader couldn't be in the game to direct them. This actually incensed the Underground Mafias, and so they decided to attack ACP once again, targeting them directly on Breeze. And when Oglethorpe heard word of this planned attack, he immediately went looking for allies with other clans who could gladly fight alongside his army and help them. One of these groups included the RPF, the Rebel Penguin Federation, who were said to be people who'd left the Mafias to create their own group after being disillusioned with their leadership, but this might just be hearsay. All of this stuff is from a long time ago and isn't necessarily well documented, but that's what the RPF, at the very least, still says is their origin to this day. With these allies, the ACP fought back, overwhelming the Mafias until Pink Mafia surrendered, posting an apology to his WordPress blog. Triumphant, the ACP was able to retake their home server of Mammoth, and, having been decided the winner, eventually became allies with the remaining members of the Underground Mafia. To quote from the ACP's website, a lot of small clans from this time had their own websites where they posted about events and their conflicts and stuff. Mostly these were just WordPress blogs, but it's kind of cool that they had their own official websites nonetheless. They said this: "Well, after a long battle, the ACP finally won. With a series of charges the ACP and RPF made from either side, we beat them. The Nachos, another clan, tried to attack us later, but failed. ACP, our plan to attack the UMA every day for a week was a success, and you should be proud. Since we beat the UMA 7 consecutive times, all 3 UMA leaders want peace, and most of the UMA troops want peace also. They basically surrender, unless we don't ally. So we will be allying with the UMA. If any ACP soldiers attack UMAs, or the other way around, we have the right to end the alliance. We will be fighting rogue UMAs that attack anyone for no reason. Just because we are allying with the UMA, it doesn't mean we have no one to fight though. Trust me, there are plenty of people that want to fight us. Since we are allies with the real UMA, not UMA rogues, Club Penguin World War III is just about over. We have almost won. We just need the Nachos to surrender and we will have won World War III. With the end of World War III, we had larger groups become the norm throughout the community. These groups were, as I said already, then called armies as opposed to clans. And lest we forget, before I go any further, everyone involved in this was like at maximum age 13 at the time, and that's a stretch. Most of them were probably quite a bit younger, which explains why everyone took this so seriously and was so dramatic about it. But I kind of love that for them. I bet they had a lot of fun. I took the sunglasses off because between like the loop of the sunglasses and this helmet pushing down, it was just not comfortable. It kept pressing into the side of my head in a way that felt icky. Peace did not last for long. Eventually, other battles broke out and were fought. And with them, changes began to occur with how battles were fought. Strategies began to develop in, for lack of a better term, something of an arms race. New ways to try and overwhelm opponents were constantly required, and so with time, they just organically came into being. Eventually, for example, formations began to become central to how armies operated. These were predetermined movements that armies would undertake to try and overwhelm their opponents. Nowadays, these tend to mainly be things like taking on the shape of things like circles or triangles in rooms to try and cover up as much of it as possible. But back in the day, these could be a lot more complex than that. In addition, eventually leaders stopped trying to direct their troops within the chat features of Club Penguin itself. This was difficult because, as Oglethorpe discovered during that battle in the dojo, sometimes the other side could be overwhelming you and your troops wouldn't be able to see the directions they were being given, and also the opposing team can also see the tactics you're directing your side to do. So the community began to use the chat site ZAR to organize during fights. This meant that organization began occurring much more off-site than it had up to this point, and this continues to be the case to this day. I could be here for forever recapping the back and forth of each battle that ensued, but the point is that as time went on, the community also developed, eventually leading to the establishment of a proper set of rules of engagement by a high-ranking member of the ACP named Boomer20. Rules around how invasions could be planned, what constituted the victory, and more were formalized for the first time in this document, which showed just how much the armies had evolved in just a few short years. I could cover the entire history of this community going forward, but I want this video to be slightly shorter than usual, so I'm going to cut to the chase. Essentially, despite all the odds, the Club Penguin armies continued for years and years until something happened which shook the community to its core. So, yeah, in case you weren't aware, the original Club Penguin shut down. Disney wasn't interested in keeping up the servers, there was a huge party, people said their goodbyes, and they even succeeded in tipping the iceberg, something users had been trying to do for years and had become something of an urban legend on the site. Thankfully, though, this didn't mean that Club Penguin itself was gone forever. Fan recreations began popping up, and whilst on occasion they are taken down by Disney, they've remained a staple online in the years since. And as such, armies have continued to operate. As per one person I interviewed for this video, things ending on the original Club Penguin allowed there to be something of a fresh start for the army community. Leagues were formally established for the first time, and in general, the average age for a participant in all this has gotten to be a little bit older, as the average age of a standard Club Penguin player nowadays is an adult in their 20s. This also means that on the whole, wars aren't declared with as much frequency as they once were, and the community is on the whole a lot more chill than it once was back when it was kind of a free-for-all and being run by 12-year-olds. Things have changed a lot since the Club Penguin Army's early days, and I imagine some of you are wondering, how do battles play out in the current era? Well, to understand that, it might be worth describing what the average experience is like for a soldier taking part in one. And luckily for you, I've taken part in quite a few. In order to understand how acting as a member of the army works, I'm going to walk you through the basics of being a good, obedient soldier. First up, you will need the uniform, which each army requires their members to wear. Nowadays, on the army's private server, which they use to host all their events, you can easily get a hold of any of the uniforms you want using a command typed into the chat bar. Uniforms can vary in appearance. For example, the Doritos army uniform includes a poncho and shield, both of which are orange like the group's namesake, the Dorito. And they're also both kind of triangular looking, so they also kind of fits with the Dorito theme. Next up, tactics and forms. Both forms and tactics are performed by an army en masse, directed by leaders via commands given out from the army's Discord. Tactics specifically refer to the phrases and emoticons that armies use during a battle. Here is an example taken from a practice battle between the Doritos and their allies, the Bastille Vanguard and the Scarlet Republic, during the community's recent March Madness tournament. Tactics can be specific phrases which are meant to insult or criticize the other side, or to toot an army's own horn, to kind of like show that they're the best. They're shared by a leader in the Discord's chat, and everyone was required to copy-paste it into the chat of Club Penguin itself.
Copy from chat ACP's wash Lama, ACP's wash LMAO. Hold this one, make it look nice. Fix the bottom, there's a gap. Thank you, Judy. Press the J.
Sometimes tactics are designed to take up a lot of space on screen when sent, and are used by armies to try and cover the tactics being sent out by the opposing team. For example, a popular one used by the Doritos is the phrase, Aisha has weight issues. Aisha is one of the heads of the Doritos, so I don't know why one of the tactics involves fat-shaming her, or why this, alongside some other tactics, are sometimes kind of juvenile, but I digress. As I mentioned, tactics can also be emoticons and not just specific phrases. These are a part of the game by default, and can be shared in chat using keyboard shortcuts. For example, pressing EH causes a penguin to emit the heart emoji. In the Club Penguin Army's private server, a lot of additional ones are added which weren't on the original Club Penguin, like this one, which can be used to let a penguin share a picture of a member of the ACP. And sometimes these are strung together to create sort of a narrative. For example, in this practice battle, the ACP emoticon was followed up by a skull, demonstrating that ACP is a rival and that they were going down in a future battle. One side's tactics can also sometimes be done as a response to the other side's tactics, or can reflect community history or in-jokes. For example, since the people in the practice battle I mentioned were our allies, some of the tactics showed that we consider them friends. Moving on now to formations, which I've kind of already talked about already. Formations refer to, well, the forms that an army will make, directed by their leaders in a room. For example, maybe soldiers will be directed to form a circle or to form something more complex like a Z or an arrow shape. These are used to try and take up space within a room on a server. Since different people may have different internet speeds, among other reasons, organizing armies so they'll coordinate properly and act like a single unit is a bit like herding cats at times.
99 to a left arrow. Make sure the diagonal is neat, and make sure to always press the down arrow every time you inform. Ignore the ACP penguin, guys, with a little bunch in the bottom left. Let's spread it out a bit, and diagonal exists. Oh, hell no. Look at the diagonal. Fix it. Make it better. Quicker. Asher, move into the form. Dancer, you've moved into the form. Penguin Doom, move into the form. The top right, we don't have a top right.
Sometimes formations aren't just making shapes. Sometimes a formation will require army members to move around a room, like when we're directed to bomb a room, for example, meaning we're all meant to run all over the room spamming the same tactic. Or when we were once directed to do a rake, which meant running back and forth from left to right whilst also spamming the tactic. Moving around in a room, especially during large battles, can be difficult, as there's often a lot of people, making it difficult to click a location on screen to direct your penguin on where to go. There was one battle I took part in during the creation of this video where I had a hard time moving around because I kept accidentally clicking on penguins and pulling up their avatars as opposed to actually clicking on some part of the ground where I wanted my penguin to move to. Tactics themselves can also be kind of tricky, as the keyboard shortcuts for emoticons can be a tad finicky at times. For example, the shortcut to share the joystick emoji is pushing E and G, but just pressing G causes your penguin to say GG as in good game. And sometimes the game doesn't automatically register the E press when doing the shortcut. This is unsurprising to some extent. It's not like Club Penguin was built to do stuff like this, but it feels worth noting. Now that you've understood the basics, it's worth describing how battles take place and how all of these are utilized in practice. Things have changed a lot in the years since the early days of Club Penguin Armies, as I've said. Both armies will log onto a specified server on the Armies Battleground iteration of Club Penguin, and both will go to a specific location to group up and start organizing. After a few practice formation and tactics, the battle will officially begin. Impartial judges will determine which room both armies will meet in, and both armies will then go to that room and begin sharing tactics at the same time, attempting to overwhelm the other side, as well as trying to outdo their opponents in several categories. These categories are judged by the judges and are as follows. Size of each army, the tactics used, formations, the speed of successfully executing these tactics and formations, and finally, creativity, how unique and clever each army's performance was. This is why we were complimented during this practice battle for our final tactic, which was one where we copy-pasted the beginning of the script for Shrek into the chat. I think if I were to compare it to some sort of modern-day sport, it would probably be like competitive cheerleading or synchronized swimming. But imagine a version of those where competing teams performed at the same time and tried to upstage and overwhelm their opponents while doing so. That's kind of the vibe I get from current Club Penguin battles. Anyways, this practice battle ended successfully, and despite a rough start because we were a little disorganized, the Doritos came out victorious. In general, battles take place across 3 rooms, and 10 minutes are spent in a given room until the judges then direct the 2 armies to go to another, and then it happens again. There is the potential for overtime, which did happen during a battle with the ACP that I also recorded for this video. Once it's over, the judges will report their findings on who won, and will give their decisions on each side's performance in each room, as well as on the whole. For example, here is a sample from the judges' final decision on the battle which I took part in between Doritos and the ACP, as part of this March Madness tournament. Room 1, Stadium. DCP enters in first, with ACP shortly following behind. ACP forms a V, while DCP surrounds the stadium. Judges notice the right side of ACP's V formation is messy, as well as the left side. DCP is faster, tactic-wise. ACP bombs first. DCP rakes shortly after. ACP forms an anchor, DCP forms an A. Throughout the battle, both armies cover nicely, although forms are messy. ACP rakes and DCP bombs. Sizes are 51 to 44, with DCP leading. Although both armies were strong for the first 3 minutes, due to messy forms, slowing down, and an overall lack of performance from both armies, Room 1 is a tie. As you can see, things have gotten a hell of a lot more formalized, and seem to be a hell of a lot more official than they were at the beginning of the community's formation. Judges actually are a relatively new addition to things. I think an official and completely impartial judging organization only was established a few years ago, believe it or not. And with all this going on, as I'm sure you can imagine, the Army community is kind of thriving. There's a lot of engagement and a lot of people going to each event, and I think that's awesome. With that said, though, recruitment is a constant worry in basically every army, and you can often find members from one army or another in private servers trying to recruit. Although they do not only recruit on Club Penguin, they also attempt to recruit off of Roblox and Minecraft, which I find odd, to be honest. Oftentimes this means that there are people completely clueless about Club Penguin in general, who need to be coached heavily at the start of a battle, who are completely lost as to what's going on. Okay, so can I just be kind of a nerd for a second? I find this sort of thing absolutely fascinating. People taking the limited tools at their disposal in a digital space and using them in a unique way, a way not expected or intended by the creators of those tools, is something I find unbelievably cool. It demonstrates a sort of lateral thinking and ingenuity that I can't help but appreciate. As I mentioned at the start of this video, Club Penguin at the start of its life was in some ways really limited, and I think that's part of why the armies came into being in the first place. It's kind of like the digital equivalent of that boomer stereotype of how back in the day we all made our own fun. People created their own games, communities, and more on Club Penguin based on what was provided because it was otherwise kind of lacking. And I think the fact that this community has lasted for so long, like we're getting close to 20 years now, and was founded mainly by children and tweens, is kind of amazing. Like, is all of this weird and kind of niche? Yes. But it stood the test of time. I know a lot of digital communities that haven't, especially ones organized by people so young as the founders of the Club Penguin armies were. Community means a lot to a lot of people. People get invested in the rivalries or in friendships that are built with people in the army they are a part of, and I think that's amazing. And I think that's kind of my main thesis here. This is all just kind of neat to me, and I hope you think so as well. I'd like to thank members of the community who made this project possible, mainly Historestro, who spoke to me extensively about its history, and Aisha, who gave me permission to record the Doritos battles. Were you ever a part of the Club Penguin armies? Did you ever have a run-in with them on the original Club Penguin? Has this video piqued your interest in any of this? I want to know, so please leave a comment below. Before we completely wrap up though, I want to just put the word out about another Club Penguin video I'd like to do as a sort of spiritual sequel to this one. I would love to talk about the Pookie community on Club Penguin. If you're unaware about what the Pookies were, they were a community of players who'd pretend to be little kids and would hang out in the Puffle shop and would ask people to adopt them. Pookies on the whole were hated by the community and you still on occasion see them on the private servers, and you, as a result, also sometimes see them getting hate. And I'm just curious. If you were or are a Pookie, I want to hear from you. I want to know why you got involved in this and what your experiences were like. I understand that this kind of thing might be kind of embarrassing. As such, if you wish to share anonymously with me, please reach out to me on Instagram, where my handle is david_m_423, or via my email, which is davidmcontent@gmail.com. I want to be as fair to you all as I possibly can. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this admittedly much shorter video than usual that didn't even get as nearly in depth as I could have gotten about this topic. If you enjoyed it, please like and leave a comment, and maybe even spread it around. If you're new here, please subscribe. If you're new here, please subscribe as well. If you like videos like this about internet culture and history. That's kind of my main thing on this channel. I love talking about stuff like this. And in the meantime, I hope you will do your army proud. I'm Captain David, and this has been your mission briefing. Bye, y'all.